Good morning, neighbors. So I got a little better mic. That other headset I was using had a bad microphone on it from yesterday's video, and I also played with the Google choices to render the video, which was ridiculous. It took a long amount of time. So you learn, you grow and you learn. We're going to talk about sample size, sampling, taking a sample, tasting a sample, the problems with samples. This can extend out to finite analysis. Samples from thousands of years ago you want to get a date from. In order to do these samplings, we have implicit and explicit rules for these samples, guidelines on how to do these things. Technically, when you see a person going for a sample, they are a technician. They're doing a technical job. They're following a process and a procedure that's a part of the type of sampling and the instruments they're going to perform the sampling on. So that is one of the tangents from the word sampling. The precision, how precise, what questions you're trying to ask from taking a sample. But the sample idea is ubiquitous as well. You go to the grocery store, you get a sample of cheese, and you say, oh, that's tasty. And you might or might not buy some. Because when you sample your bank account, you realize that there's not enough money in there for the good cheese. So you buy the cheaper cheese because you get more. But the sample was tasty. Sample usually has a definition. It might be a soft definition. The sample of cheese is a soft definition, but you sample with maybe goat's milk. Manipulated and matured and ripened and seasoned and moldy. That was in that sample. This notion of sampling causes a challenge to one of those other big concepts out there, AI, replacing humans. You can consider the samples, the types of samples the human body takes. Not how we perceive them, interpret them, just the amount and the range of samples, what we hear in one ear versus the other ear, what we smell, how well we can smell. I've lost a lot of my flavor palette, but I can still smell organic chemicals very too well, kind of. I like oil on my hands. So, sample size. It's very hard to fathom that there are rules that get very, very specific just to collect the sample. That process, that technique. I mentioned earlier a PBS, was it Eons video. I'll put a link back down to it in the description that mentions sampling organic materials from the past, removed from sedimentary layers from the past, and they took CO2 out of that sample. Well, CO2 is a gas. Why did it stay in that sample for however long it did? Because of a well-exhausted set of studies that led to reliable, repeatable procedures for a person to take a sample of that type. If you look closely at that video, those little containers he's using look pretty fancy and specific, and they're also individually labeled. If he turns around, it's probably in his head. There are pages, volumes, and those lead and reference books and piles from the pyramid of knowledge we've built for him to explain that. It wasn't done in that video very well. But it was there, you could see it. You could see the cryogenic chambers he was using for some part of the separations to get CO2 out of an organic sample that honestly we had no idea of the age of. But honestly we had a good idea of the age of because of sedimentary layers and our understanding over time of how they built up. Those samples were very specific, and then they didn't take you into the lab where the instrument sits. We do time of flight measurements inside those labs. Now some say that Myron helped invent time of flight studies. If you know Myron and the history of Myron, you'll giggle and get some pine points. So this notion of sampling, sample size, what is a sample? It was I, because I was responsible for the analyzers, but we, because this was a corporation and I worked with an engineering group, ran chromatographs inside an industrial complex servicing 2 chemical facilities. We had liquid and gas chromatographs. And at the time we're using capillary columns to do separations of gases, to measure specific gases. And that's molecular measurements depending upon the size of those gases and how fast, how quickly they'll flow through a molecular sieve is part of how the instrument works. The sample size introduced into a gas analyzer is very well studied and understood. A person doing a technician job has many records supporting the process, the things, the job that he's doing, the engineering work, the scientific work, the technical work. Sample size, big thing. This is part of another big word I want to speak to, the word regulated, because that word's in the Constitution. But that word was in my gas process and liquid process sample analyzers. How long did it take for a sample to arrive from where it was made in a chemical process to my analyzer? Then how long did the analyzer take to analyze that? So my time of analysis is actually minutes after the time of sample. It's not that confusing when you sit down and draw it out and map it out. Maybe somebody up here helps explain some of the technical details or points you to the references that apply in this very specific case. So sample size, that didn't help much. Find some free cheese. Free cheese is always good. So to that word, there are tangents. To that word, there are some obtuse things that don't matter. And to those words, there were meanings, which might be hard to understand in context. So there you go, pieces out, and bicycles. Lots of songs about bicycles, go listen to them.